Okay, so good morning, or not good morning. Still thinking of morning. Good evening, everyone, all our viewers on Facebook, those watching via Facebook, and those of you in our Zoom meeting room, and those of you who will be watching via YouTube, our YouTube recording. This evening, we are privileged to have a few guests. We have two distinguished guests who will be joining us for this Q&A session, Q&A session number 9, Q&A 9, on the foreign policy process in PNG, or PNG's foreign policy review process, the review process. We have Dr. Francis Hualupmomi from the Department of Prime Minister and NEC with us, and he's also our National Security Advisor. We also have another guest from the University of Papua New Guinea, UPNG, Mr. Patrick Kaiku, who is a lecturer in political science. He teaches at the university. And all of you know, we have our usual speaker who's been kind enough to share with us his insight on PNG's foreign policy, Mr. Lawi Ako. So all three gentlemen, they have something in common. All of them have a background in political science from UPNG, and Mr. Ako continued his postgrad at UPNG. Mr. Kaiku went to Hawaii to do his postgrad. Dr. Hualupmomi went to China and New Zealand to do his postgraduate studies. So all three will share with us their knowledge and what they know about PNG's foreign policy and the review process itself. But we'll start off with our main sessional lecturer, Mr. Laoyako. He'll take us into the discussion. And I believe all of you have taken note of the three questions that I'll be asking Mr. Ako to get his feedback and kickstart the discussion. Okay, to begin with, the first question is, why is it important to review our foreign policy approaches regularly? So we'll start off with Mr. Ako, and then I'll give time to Dr. Hualupmomi and Mr. Kaiku to come in as well to share the views, perspective in regards to the question. Mr. Ako, please go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Giora, and good evening, students, and also good evening to Dr. Hualupmomi and Mr. Kaiku. It's really a privilege to have you in this session to support support and continue the enlightening process we have taken on board at the Divine Word. Well, with regards to the first question, the importance of reviewing our foreign policy approach regularly, it's very, very important and critical. In that our last review before this was in 1979, 1980, 1981, which came up with the foreign policy white paper in 1982 on the active and selective engagement outlook. And then from 1982, 92, 2002, 2012, 30, 2022, 40 years. It's taken us before we commence another review process, which has ended this year, according to public knowledge. And next year, during our 50th independence celebrations, we'll be launching our new white paper. This is according to the media releases. The need to regularly review our foreign policy approaches. I've just listed here one thing. But just this is one thing with its subheadings. So, in my view, I think geopolitics is the main cause of us reviewing our foreign policy regularly. And I use the word geopolitics first because I think that we need, when there's geopolitical turbulences in the region or internationally, then we need to realign our interest. And this realignment can come through either this realignment can happen or come through our hosting of an international engagement, or attending a hosting or attending a regional or international engagement. Now, I'm using that because we all know that when we host or attend an international conference, it is because of the agenda on hand that we are going. And some economies or some countries do not attend particular conferences because the agenda does not go in line with their foreign policies, or they would like to go and meet, listen to what others will say, or purposely to go and have bilateral meetings with their development partner, their colleagues there. Because international conferences, or especially conferences are usually multilateral, they provide the opportunity for our leaders and also our ministers and officials who in a normal situation would be unable to meet with those colleagues. They can meet them on the sidelines. So that affects our foreign policy review. Another, still under geopolitics, another cause to effect review would be world events. World events that pushes world events that can push Papua New Guinea. Let's use PNG as an example. World events that can push PNG towards prioritizing or reprioritizing its existing alliances. And this can come through climate change issues. Can come to climate change issues or disasters. Can come to security issues such as the war. It can come through domestic issues, because our domestic issues can affect our international relations. Because being a developing economy, we have development partners supporting us. So, for instance, we consider the visa on arrival with our Australian bilateral partner. They don't allow visa on arrival because of the migration regulations and laws, and we are pushing for that. So how does that affect our foreign policy review? How does that lead us to review our foreign policy when it comes to movement of people across borders or visa issues or illegal migration? There's a lot of factors to take into account. So I'll open the discussions through that. I think a foreign policy must be reviewed regularly due to geopolitics. And according to my understanding, geopolitics is affected by world events that need to realign, and also climate change and other security issues. I'd like to hear Dr. Hualupmomi and Mr. Kaiku's views on this, because I know they teach that regularly, so they will have other thoughts which I may have most definitely missed out. Thank you for that, Mr. Aguirre.
Thank you, Mr. Doctor, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Bernard and Mr. Lawiako, for always having regular conversations on international relations and international security, geopolitics. I usually follow your conversation in silence, but well done. In terms of question number one, let me start by this way. There are several points that I want to make. Number one is that foreign policy basically is a public policy. Why I'm saying this? Because it reflects our aspirations captured in sectoral policies. So why it is called foreign policy? Because those are sectoral policy interests are now being pursued at international level. I'll give you an example. Higher education plan talks about building a quality system. And one of the goal areas is to have strategic partnership with advanced countries such as US, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and in the East. And how do you pursue it? You pursue it through international interactions, through foreign affairs, so as environment and any other economic and social dimensions of national interest reflected in those sectoral policies. That's number one. Number two is that environment keeps on changing constantly, and therefore policies must reflect those changes. The environment is very complex, it's very dynamic, and policy must always adapt to those complexity. Because the environment is so complex, it increases the tendency for uncertainty. Therefore, the domestic policies must change to reflect those changes. Only then, if we change domestic policies, then the foreign policy takes its cue and are now pursued internationally. Because as I go back to point number one, foreign policy is basically a reflection of domestic policies that are pursued internationally. So because of the changing environment, the policy must always change. That's the nature of public policy and foreign policy. Number two is, I agree, following on from Mr. Ako's point on geopolitics. As you know, the environment changed, political interaction also changed. The dynamics become so complicated. We are moving away from unipolar world into a multipolar world, involving a wide range of actors and therefore various or multiple interests intersecting with each other, which makes it more complicated. And also you have developments in technological transformation like information and communication technology, so as interdependence. So the economic, political, trade and investment, so as the cultural dimension, social and cultural dimension of the state becomes relevant and also complicated at the same time. And therefore, it compels the state to reflect on those global changes and accommodate them in both the domestic policy so as the foreign policy. So basically, the changing environment and geopolitical events that obviously will influence and shape our foreign policy. And also it is important to note that great power politics, especially the interaction between US and China, will continue to shape our foreign policy. Whether we are prepared for it or not, it's the role of the state to continue prepare to meet those changing expectations. Thank you, Mr. Bennett.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hualupmomi and Mr. Ako. Now let's listen to Mr. Kaiku. What is your take on the first question? Why is it important to review our foreign policy approaches regularly? We also welcome our visitors or our student visitors from UPNG, UPNG's Political Science program. Thank you for joining us as well. And also thank your lecturer for joining us. I'll give Mr. Kaiku a few minutes to.
Maybe if I can add,
Hello, Mr.
does-
Yogura.
oh, go ahead.
Okay. Mr. Loyako, you can say, you wanted to say something. I'll come after you.
Okay, just a quick point. I adding on to what Dr. Hualupmomi said. I do agree, and it's very, very clear. He's explained it very clearly that foreign policy is a public policy because how we organize ourselves, like the example he used on the international education aspire initiatives, particularly on STEM, which other developed economies have the capabilities on. We look at market access and trade that affects our domestic situation also. So once we fix ourselves up, and like you said, the situation is very turbulent regularly. So we might come up with a policy, but then a big power politics and play has now moved in another direction. We have to review that again. So I think I agree, and it's very clear. It works both ways. Yeah. Emtasol, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Yogura, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you, Mr.
Okay,
Kaiku.
thank you. So thank you, Dr. Hualupmomi and Mr. Loyako. Thank you, Mr. Yogura, for giving me the opportunity to speak, and it's an honor to be, talking. I will be the academic here, and my two practitioners colleagues will be the, giving the structure to the, what will I say? That's the abstract ideas that perhaps I may be throwing in with this discussion. These questions are, I think a third already of what I prepared to say was already mentioned by the two first speakers, Dr. Hualupmomi and Mr. Hako. So Mr. Hako made reference to world events, the changing priorities and alliances, geopolitics, and Dr. Hualupmomi talking about the dynamic changes in our neighborhood, compelling us to develop and to review our foreign policy approaches. I had three basic points I wanted to make, and I think because of our situation with the Eminent Peasants Group leading the review, and the current draft is it's currently being considered before cabinet. Is it, Mr. Ako? The current draft of the.
I think Dr. Hualupmomi would be in a better position to answer us on that.
Okay, the foreign policy white paper draft is completed. What I can say is that it will be submitted to the office of the Chief Secretary and then to Cabinet. That's what I know.
So that's the process that it will take in the course of its life before it becomes tabled on the floor of Parliament. Okay, so much of what we are talking about perhaps is compelled by that particular process. If there was no review, I don't think we'll be talking about it now. But Mr. Ako, I follow what you've been talking about with Mr. Yogura over the course of the last 2 years. And I think part of the pressure to review our foreign policy also comes from, learned practitioners who see the need for us to be talking about these things. And I think credit should also be given to Mr. Hako and his advocacy role in getting, some traction outside of, politics and the bureaucracy and push for this agenda. I had 3 points to actually talk about, and the first one was already mentioned by Dr. Hualupmomi and Mr. Ako. The first answer I would think of is the regional and global situations are dynamic. Mr. Ako writes about mega trends. So there are mega trends impacting states, and the need to keeping abreast with the changing circumstances and power configurations in the international system actually compels states to review their foreign policy approaches. And the international system is not static, it's dynamic. Different actors, mega trends, power configurations, the capabilities of states changing constantly, that a small state like Papua New Guinea has to be abreast with what's happening outside. If we don't review our foreign policy, we can be stuck in the status quo, the old mindset of trying to always react instead of being proactive about what is happening around us. So I guess that was perhaps the compelling reason why the EPG, and if you read the speeches and the interviews by people like Duverian now and Meg Taylor and Dr. Clement Wine, they're talking about how the geopolitics of the neighborhood and the U.S.-China rivalry is I think the primary concern here why Papua New Guinea has gone ahead with reviewing its foreign policy approaches. I think the second point for my answering this question is the need for domestic calibration of agencies and ministries. We talk about the external environment, but reviewing of foreign policies also should be the, speaking as an academic, in the way that we look at domestic agencies and ministries who are conducting our foreign relations, the whole of government, the so-called whole of government approach to dealing with international relations. So the external environment can can impact our approaches and our review, but also it's also about aligning domestic ministries and agencies who are dealing with our foreign relations to be coordinated and calibrated, because foreign affairs is supposed to be unified, coordinated, practice of state. If Foreign Affairs Minister department is doing its own thing, and Department of Trade and Investment is doing its own thing, and Department of Defense, I don't think there's any way of maximizing on PNG's national interest. That's the way I see it. I will be open to other discussions or other points by the other two speakers. The third point, I guess, to answer the first question, is institutional memory is created. Reviews provide documentation of policy evolution over time that will be the basis for future generations to draw lessons from. We review foreign policy approaches because these are the basis for which we learn from previous experiences of reviews. So the much talked about 1981 foreign policy review is always the benchmark. It's always the benchmark. That is the institutional memory that we draw on to see how an ideal policy review, foreign policy review is made. So as an academic who teaches diplomacy, I try to understand how diplomacy is a practice that is knowledge built on knowledge from previous generations. You practice what you know of that is documented. So we can learn how Papua New Guinea progresses if we have benchmarks and reviews that are officially documented and archived, and they serve as institutional memory for future generations of Papua New Guineans who are studying diplomacy and want to know the foreign policy priorities of Papua New Guinea to access. It should be publicly available for our use when we are trying to understand how Papua New Guinea deals with its external environment. So I think those are the 3 points I wanted to make. Thank you. Go back. I'll give back to you, Mr. Yegiora.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kaiku and Dr. Hualupmomi, as well as Mr. Ako. Students, I hope you took note of what they said. Very interesting points brought out by the 3 speakers. And as Mr. Kaiku said, you have a good blend in our discussion, a good blend of individuals in our discussion tonight. So you have two practitioners and two academics. So you'll see Mr. Kaiku and I are academics. We come from that standpoint, and Mr. Ako and Dr. Hualupmomi, they are practitioners. So that leads me to the second question. Mr. Ako and I, we've been talking about foreign policy for the last 3 years, and it's already a school of thought. Mr. Ako, in many of his lectures, repeatedly has stated that there should be, from a practitioner's point of view, he has argued that there should be a clause in our constitution where we talk about foreign policy and we make sure that there's no political influence and there's consistency. Every new government that comes in, as per the constitution, it talks about there's a part or there's a clause on foreign policy, and we should follow what the previous government has done and then review and make changes. But there needs to be a foreign policy in place to give strategic direction to every new government or every government that comes after five years. So we've called that the Ako school of thought. So he wants a clause in the constitution, so there's consistency, and because all of us know in this day and age of geopolitical competition, it's very important for developing countries or developed countries to have foreign policies to strategically guide us to achieve our national interest. So based on that discussion that we have gone over or had for the past couple of years, do you think, the question now is, do you think this would improve the foreign policy review process? Why or why not? We'll start off with Mr. Ako and then we'll go to Doctor, or whichever who wants to come first. I leave the floor open.
Maybe I'll start because it's Ako's thought, so it's better I give my thought to
Yes,
his
yes.
thoughts.
Then we'll close up or wind up or end the discussion with Mr.
Yes.
Ako. All right.
Okay. I think the idea of anchoring foreign policy under law or legal framework is the most strategic approach to take because of a political environment. We have political instability in terms of changing policy priorities in tandem with change in political regime. So it is better to anchor foreign policy under a legal framework. But there are also other considerations that you need to take. You need to look at. I'll speak from the experience of framing the national security policy and trying or to make an attempt to anchor it under law. So based on the legal advice that we received from state solicitor, according to the hierarchy of law, the best way to do it is to anchor it under an organic law. So if you want to, and I'll give you the reason why you should consider either you anchor it under a constitution, the organic law, or under an act of parliament. So according to the hierarchy of law, constitution is the supreme legal framework that all other legislation are defined within that framework. So as the organic law. So second to constitution is the organic law. So the organic law gives you a wider spectrum that can give you the mandate where there'll be less political interference into foreign policy making and its conduct. If you want to take the organic law, the lengthy process of framing or drafting the law or framing the particular provision under constitution or the organic law, it's a very lengthy process. You will have to go back, amend the constitution, and you have to meet the parliamentary standing orders, three readings. So it takes time. And the chances of it getting anchored under constitution can be affected because government do change anytime based on our democratic process. So as the organic law too. So one of the best advice that I get from the state solicitor is to peg it under an act of parliament. Because this involves just one reading. That's it. I know that Department of Foreign Affairs doesn't have legislation at the moment. Correct me, Mr. Lawiako. So the best way for them to do is to take the foreign policy and frame it under an act of parliament so that it governs the establishment of the department, and somewhere within that framework you can insert the provision on foreign policy. So again, it's the lengthy process of getting our intention into a legal framework on the basis of the hierarchy of law. The Constitution, it takes a lot of time, and you may end up eventually not achieving your objective. You look at the ICAC bill, it took almost 2 decades for it to be legislated because the Constitution is a mother law. You have to undertake comprehensive legislative or consultative process to ensure that you remove or you add a clause into the Constitution. So I agree that foreign policy must be anchored by law. In that way, we are able to continuously adjust our national interest at international level. So the adjustment is subject to our domestic public policy and also the changing environment. So the law gives or protect it from being manipulated or interfered with the political process. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Let's listen to Mr. Kaiku.
Thank you, Doctor, for the presentation and the distinguishing the hierarchy of legislation and where any constitutional situation may arise, and the challenges with making this particular suggestion constitutional, being a part of the Constitution. Okay, I don't necessarily, I will not necessarily talk about the legislative reform that will be needed to anchor foreign policy in our Constitution or in any act of parliament or legislation. I will just agree with the proposal, and these are my reasons why I think it is a necessity. We all understand that Papua New Guinea's public service, the domestic public service, has serious challenges in terms of meritocracy and undue political influence and some of the very bad things that we see in the domestic ministries and agencies of government in the public service. They are, they have the likelihood of, being replicated also in our the lead agency in implementing our foreign affairs. So I guess what I'm saying here is that I support this proposal. Our ministry that is responsible for executing our foreign affairs and our foreign policy has to be quarantined from, the domestic petty politics and the appointment processes that are not based on meritocracy or, the diplomatic appointments that bypass meritocracy or just put people who are political cronies in, very critical areas of our bilateral or multilateral engagements. So, this like you may talk how you mean by advancing national interest law country. Our foreign policy has to be a highly robust, very professional, very adaptable, intellectually proactive and forward thinking, and it should not be tied up with the domestic public service culture that we have in our country at the moment. That is the kind of, thing we're trying to prevent from tainting the professionalism of foreign affairs, because statecraft and especially diplomatic engagement is a completely different ball game altogether. It should be distinguished from the domestic public service that some of us see as being, very, very, very highly susceptible to being, influenced by domestic factors, political factors. So I agree with the idea of this constitutional amendment or legislative legislative framework to guide our foreign affairs. But in terms of its structure, I will not clarify because I may not be a lawyer or a legal person to think of that. I'll leave that to Mr. Lawi Ako, who is more versed in the subject matter.
Thank you, Mr. Kaiku. Tupla, very interesting perspective from Dr. Hualupmomi and Mr. Kaiku. We are not lawyers. We are speaking from a layman's point of view, political science point of view. So let's listen to Mr. Ako. Mr. Ako, can you share some detail into what the Ako School of Thought is? Drawing from
Thank
what
you.
and Mr. Kaiku have shared with us.
Oh no, thank you very much. Those were very, very factual considerations which were given. I take them as facts given by Dr. Hualupmomi and Mr. Kaiku, especially on the experience Dr. Hualupmomi got from the national security policy and the challenges he faced. That puts our brings to light the fact that using Mr. Kaiku's word, our foreign policy must be protected and quarantined by law. Now, the stages of achieving that through the law, has been explained to us nicely by Dr. Hualupmomi, that you need to have a tremendous amount of support to push any bill. If it's an organic law constitution, and it takes 3 readings, and depending on we've all seen how the convening of the parliament sittings, sometimes they postpone or moving dates, and time comes in. Now with the act, it only involves 1 reading. That also it can be challenging, but the work law passing or putting on the next stage is much more lighter than if we were to go higher. One of the main reasons my thoughts on pushing for the foreign policy to be anchored / quarantine by law is the example of former Prime Minister Skate's 1995 unilateral decision to recognize Taiwan as or push our diplomatic relations with Taiwan, and that was done in unilaterally by the Prime Minister. With, we don't know, maybe with some ministers, we don't know. Now, if it was quarantine, member had law. And when that happened, it caused a lot of uproar in the region. Our Australia and China approached the government and told them that it was not a direction which they had hoped PNG would take, and that caused its downfall too. I think a couple of weeks or even a month or two after that, Sam McCarry became prime minister after that, and he quickly went ahead and said, no, we will go back to our one China policy. And then we also look at between 1992 and 1992 and maybe 2000, the stages of our strategic, our foreign policy intent. Look north, look north, and then later look north and work the Pacific. And we had a number of other intents that were all tied into the 1982 white paper. So that showed that showed us that depending on who's in authority, M can change him or move him in one direction, and it affects the bureaucracy. It affects bureaucracy because we all know that postings, the diplomatic postings, and the foreign service structure is tied to the foreign policy direction of a country. So if the country wants to move all its concentration to the north, to Asia, then of course it will have to restructure its foreign service to ensure that much resources are put into the Asia branch or the Asia division or the Asia desk. It is no use pointing the country's direction into Asia and then putting all the resources into the Pacific Islands. So those were some of the considerations that pointed me in the direction to think that it is best to have our foreign policy anchored. So if there's a vote of no confidence, well, imagine if like today, and if there had been a change in government, would they have changed? Would they have come down and stopped the foreign policy review and did a new one again, or look at it and said no, redo it, but point it in this other direction? Or you may not sabe. And as foreign policy and international relations is all about strategic management, and as armchair strategists, we want to make sure that we look to the future and also balance the turbulent environment we are living in and the constant changes, and our chances of adapting to new changes are more can be more successful than if we didn't have a foreign policy if we didn't have a foreign policy that was anchored in law, that would stop that. Well, like that would literally stop any political head or any departmental head from doing others, and that also protects the integrity of the offices those people hold. No, if they have if they come under threat or come under the temptation of aligning the country's national interest differently, the act will stop him more. It will be illegal. No, they'll go to jail for it because it broke him law na instead of point course or point course na act much point course. So that was my thoughts on making sure that pushing for any foreign policy white paper and intend to be anchored by law, and I'm very thankful for the other considerations and ideas given to us by Dr. Hualupmomi and Mr. Kaiku. Thank you for that, Mr. Yagura.
Okay, thank you, Tripla. If you have any questions or comments, please take note, and then after the final question, I'll open for questions and answers from attendees or those of you listening. The third and final question is related to the process itself, the foreign policy review process. If you look at our history since independence, like from my own observation or my own analysis, I may be wrong, maybe I missed out something, but I picked up three processes. The first one was in three different review process. The first one was in from 1979 to 1980. We had a consultant, Professor Ted Wolfers, who was hired by the government to come conduct a review, and then he was instrumental in putting together the first foreign policy white paper, which was approved by Parliament in 1981. That's the first process that I picked out from the literature, from our history so far. The second process was around, Mr. Ako said somewhere around 2009, 10, 11, when the late Michael Mawe was the foreign secretary. So what he did was called all the HOMs or head of missions to come back to Port Moresby, and there was a conference and everyone contributed their ideas, and there were two, I think Dr. Kwa was there as a consultant and then put together the ideas and presented it as a review report. Mr. Ako can correct me on that. And the final one is, we're all familiar with that now, the EPG, the Tachinko Marape combination. Now they're using different former diplomats and people from different walks of life to work together to formulate the second foreign policy white paper in our history so far. So yes, Dr. Kwa and Mr. Robert Igara. So these are the three review processes that I've picked out from reading our PNG foreign policy history so far. So with that, the question is, should there be a more formal and structured process for reviewing foreign policy in the future? And how might this benefit the nation? So should you just stick to one, the EPG format or EPG process, or the consultant, head of missions? Let's listen to our panel of experts. Whoever wants to jump in first, please feel free.
I'll jump in first.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, I think I'll start this way. We have a lot of Papua New Guineans who have higher qualifications in international relations. And I have an opinion that we should use our own Papua New Guineans too. Those who are in public service, already in the public service, and those who are academics in our institutions should be the future let me put it this way. Having observed the process that this foreign policy process has gone through, I am of the view that we should start thinking about using our public servants who are highly experienced, who are knowledgeable and experts in their own rights in various fields associated with international relations. And of course, using our academics and think tanks. So it becomes a regular culture of reviewing any public policy, not only foreign policy. In that way, we'll be able to give the best and quality thoughts, a combination of practice and academic perspective. So a holistic approach based on evidence to drive foreign policy. It's good that we have eminent group engaged in such undertakings. But I have the opinion that in future undertakings we should look at this way. It should be led by public servants from the Department of Foreign Affairs with academics who are qualified to contribute in that space. Because they are more updated with the current trends in foreign relations in different dimensions like security, climate change, other cultural undertakings in foreign relations like sports diplomacy. So that's what I thought. But I'll leave it to Mr. Ako and Mr. Patrick Kaiku. Why I'm saying this because I was actually engaged to design the review the national security policy, and I drafted myself. I don't see it's a very complicated process. Actually, you don't need many people to even write it. You just need 1 or 2 people to review it, draft it, and then you consult the stakeholders. That's it. But it must be a periodic process where you continue to update and align our strategic priorities with the changing environment, externally and internally. Yeah.
Mr. Yediora, is it possible I come in?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay.
If Dr.
Mr.
is,
Lauliako may come afterwards because he will bring the, he will come, try to tie up the, whereas I'll speak from again, academic perspective. And I always think that, when I was reading these 3 questions you sent me, I think that the second question and the third question, the second and third questions, they go together. They should be part of a package in the reform agenda in our foreign affairs. So instituting the independence and competency and merit-based aspect of our foreign affairs, especially the execution of our foreign policy, and also tie that in with some structure about the role of public servants and foreign affairs officials in the review of foreign policy. Because you are doing 2 things here. You are making meritocracy an important part of our foreign service, but also you are giving or empowering the people who are executing our foreign affairs policy the role of reviewing. So who better to do a review of our foreign policy than the people who are executing it? But they can also contract it out and also engage other stakeholders. So I think I'm speaking from my also reading of other countries in the region. Australia and New Zealand, we learn so much about them through their NRL and rugby league, and we follow whatever cultural things that come out of their country. But I hardly think that Papua New Guineans, we try to learn from Australians the way they conduct their foreign affairs. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, it's very well-oiled machinery. They do their own review of their foreign policy. And even New Zealand, a very small country, 6 million or 5 million people. But, when you talk about how they're so adept at, making sure that they understand the dynamic changes around their neighborhood and globally, they're so adept at, their foreign service or for the foreign affairs is very adept at, making changes or reviewing itself every year or every 2 years. And they're always on the game. That is the kind of sophistication that comes about as a result of the second question there. A foreign affairs department that is independent and it is always meritocratic based. So I think what I'm saying also is that empowering public servants with the review process gives them a stake, a buy-in into the, execution of that foreign policy. The second point I wanted to make was we currently have a parliamentary committee on foreign affairs who's currently Mr. Yegira. Can you correct me? Who is the current chair of that committee? Is it Belden Nama, the Banimo MP, Banimo Green MP?
yes, Belden Nama.
Okay, so he heads that particular parliamentary committee, and in any kind of foreign policy review, you would think that this is the agent, this is the parliamentary committee that should be activated to collect, what is it? They call it what? Papers or what do they call it? Policy papers or submissions. When we have written submissions, we as stakeholders like in the academia, and we want to influence the findings or the recommendations in that parliamentary committee call for review of our foreign policy. When we make submissions, and that parliamentary committee can be supported by technocrats in the Department of Foreign Affairs. So that could be one of the likely, if we are thinking very strategic and trying to empower bureaucracy to be able to take ownership of the review process, then this is the available institutions or mechanisms that are already in place. You don't need to reinvent the new wheel, creating EPGs, which will be used and then discarded off, and there's no capacity building in the foreign service and the public service of the country. I think I'll leave this to Mr. Lawiyako, and he will add more to it. Thank you.
No, thank you, Mr. Kaiku, and also Dr. Hualupmomi again on the ability of Papua New Guineans to do it themselves, and it shows the shortfall. It shows the skills gap. Shows a skills gap in departments who want to write policies, but then they don't have the skills gap. They don't have the skills to do it, so they go out and get experts to come and do it. And the EPG is such an example. These experts came and wrote it, and they left, and now you have to call in another group of experts again to come and build capacity within the foreign service to implement the foreign policy. So it depends on the priority of the management and the government. If the government thinks that that's the way to go, then that will be the way to go. But then you see that on the other hand, the NSP was written by one person through a consultative process, but it was written by a person. So we already have a benchmark there, you see, and I'm so glad that Dr. Hualupmomi mentioned that. We already have a benchmark that we can do it. And, it's very interesting. It's very interesting to note that this is how we've gone, and in less than 12 months' time, we'll be launching the new foreign policy, and we just hope that we have the manpower to implement it. The New Zealand example provided by Mr. Kaiku is also very factual. Their APEC team, they have a very small APEC team of maybe 5 or 6 people, but they are drawn from across the public service. You see, so anything to do with any agenda within the APEC process, they do it. And I might also add here also that in 2014, Dr. Hualupmomi, in 2000, you wrote the first APEC policy. You contributed to one of the first APEC policy initiatives from DHEST.
Yeah.
You
Correct,
see,
correct.
and then and these were the markers which we kept on telling the economists. We can do it. Our own people are contributing to the APEC policy process. And this is no we are not comparing ages, the era of PNG's participation in APEC. There are different stages and different circumstances from 1993 up that did not allow us to host. But then the time was right there between the 2010 and 2020 decade. We had the manpower to do it. So I agree with I'm in full support of what the two ex-team speakers have mentioned, that foreign policy review must happen regularly because it provides the institutional memory for the next group of people. We are lucky. Our generation is lucky that we could find a copy of the 1982 paper. What if suppose no that? And we'll be guest spying all over the place, and we'll be relying on the institutional memory of our esteemed eminent persons to provide that. And one of the initiatives also is to have real-time relevance. You know, real-time relevance in the real-time relevance in the game. You know? If you are not relevant in the game, then your thoughts are also not relevant. You know, we keep on using the NRL example, and you bring in someone from the 1980s to coach rugby now. Hey, 1980 time to spear tackle na neck pipe na up and under. Put him, coach more line. That team will be suspended for the whole year in today's rules. So it's about adaptability also. So we just have to keep on working together like this to ensure that we provide the added knowledge and stuff to support the operationalization of our foreign policy white paper from next year onwards. Let me stop now, Mr. Aguirre.
Yeah, just to add on, in 2014, under the leadership of Mr. Ako and Chief Secretary, now Chief Secretary Ivan Pomalo, they had faith in young public servants to drive those sectoral policies at the APEC level. I was given the opportunity to develop the human resource development framework that was actually accepted into the APEC priorities. You know, you learn by doing it. And how can you do it when you are not being given the opportunity to do so? There are smart public servants around. You just need to give them the opportunity. Let them do it themselves, and you have experienced people guiding them. And over time, you'll see they'll become expert in their own right. I learned it through this process. Over time, I became expert on my own right in the art of drafting public policy. So I would like to think that we must give the opportunity to young Papuans who are now being recruited into the public service to learn the art of strategic planning, strategic thinking. You know, if you learn this art, you can be able to apply it in foreign policy, in security policy, in economic policy, anywhere else in the public policy space. So the drive is there. We just need to utilize them, including engaging more with our academic community. We have academics there. They provide the evidence-based support to the framing of the public policy and per se of our foreign policy. So it must be a periodic process of foreign policy review, because if you look at the foreign policy, it, as I was saying earlier on, it reflects the domestic policy. If you want to review foreign policy, you must go back to economic and trade policy, whether the economic and trade policy is up to date before you frame a foreign policy. You cannot just frame a foreign policy in the absence of domestic public policy. All our sectoral policies must be updated periodically so that they are ready to be pursued internationally. That's where foreign policy comes in and pick up the cue from domestic policies and pursue it else. You cannot put the cart before the horse. You are framing a foreign policy in the absence of an outdated public policy. So you see the logic that in the beginning I was saying that foreign policy is basically a reflection of the domestic policy. You cannot develop a foreign policy in the absence of an outdated or a revised public policy.
Okay, thank you. I think Doctor has summed up everything nicely. And it's the silent cry of academics and I believe those in bureaucracy that we need to be given the opportunity to step up and talk about policy, review policies, implementation, monitoring, evaluation. So what Doctor said is it's something that all of us are talking about silently in all our conversations. So thank you, Doctor, for pointing that out. With that, we have reached the end of our discussion with our experts, and now I will open the floor for Q&A, questions and answers or comments from our audience. But to begin with, we have a comment from Rick Warren on Facebook. Rick said, in line with what Patrick is saying, Mr. Kaiku, I guess we need to have a national organization similar to the US Department of State, because the way I see it, PNG Foreign Affairs doesn't have enough expertise to deal with different state matters from different sectors. I guess by creating a national collaborative agency that focuses on PNG, IR, and foreign policy issues only, both resource and service sectors, we can be able to effectively drive our foreign policy objectives. That's how I see it from a layman's perspective. Thank you. That's from Rick Warren on Facebook. His comment is there to open the discussion. Questions, comments? Anybody want to expand on what?
Maybe
Richard
Dr.
said?
Hualupmomi. Maybe Dr. Hualupmomi could answer it based
Yep,
on his current experience in government and the structures of departments.
Oh, yeah, it's a good point that our commentator has put forward. In my view, it's not necessary to establish a state department. Department of Foreign Affairs is a mandated agency. It's a government agency responsible for pursuing our foreign interest in as far as international relations is concerned. It's just that the name has been changed from Foreign Affairs and Trade to Foreign Affairs periodically due to political convenience. But as far as the government is concerned, Department of Foreign Affairs remains the only agency for pursuing our foreign interest in international relations. As I stated earlier on, foreign affairs, they have the capacity. It's just that we just need to give them the opportunity to take lead. And in the process, they will eventually learn the art of designing foreign policy themselves in the future. So if you're not given the opportunity, it's quite difficult for you to start, working on the process. You'll be always too dependent on consultants, and therefore you explicitly use resources that can be used more economical by the department. So I don't think it's necessary for government to establish a state agency. Foreign affairs is there. We just need to give them the opportunity. That's number one. Number two is that given the economic condition, I don't think it will be necessary to establish more agencies. It is highly likely that it won't take place.
Thank you, Doctor. Any questions, comments for our panel this evening? Mr. Ako, Mr. Kaiku, and Dr. Hualupmomi. Those of you who reflected on what they've shared with us in relation to the three questions, anything that you need clarification on, any points that they've mentioned, you all are aware of the functions of the Parliamentary Committee on Defense and Foreign Affairs. We have a question for Ms. Levy. Ms. Levy, do you want to read out your question? It'll be good to listen to your voice. Please go ahead. Antonia, you have the space. You have the virtual mic now. You can ask your question. I think there's something wrong with your microphone. Yeah, I can ask on your behalf. All right, so the question is from Ms. Antonia Levy. Her question is, what are some factors that may be preventing our Papua New Guinean experts and academics from participating in the review of our foreign policy? Thank you, Antonia. I leave it to the floor for our.
I can answer one.
Right.
Bureaucracy priorities would be one, and also bureaucracy priorities, and also ministerial guidance. Ministerial guidance in the makeup of ministerial guidance in the makeup of the teams, in the makeup of the team to be tasked in carrying out such an undertaking.
Yeah, so what
Yes,
Mr.
go
Ako
ahead.
was saying is that sometimes the minister give directions as to who should constitute the makeup of a team or technical working group in framing foreign policy, for instance. And sometimes it's the bureaucratic priorities. If there are not enough or sufficient funding to consult extensively, they might limit the scope of consultation within the bureaucracy. I think that's what Mr. Ako was trying to explain.
Mr. Yigiora? Hello?
Yes, Mr. Kaiku, please go ahead.
Sorry, I keep coming in because I'm not sure where my mic is not okay. I have to be. This is I think my second time now to be on Zoom, so apologies if I'm making mistakes along the way. I guess the whole argument is executive prerogative of the minister. I mean, the powers to allocate or designate certain functions or contract out review of foreign policy or is the prerogative of the minister, and it can say that this executive prerogative, you know, through his position in cabinet, and therefore is given the mandate as the minister responsible to contract out this review process to whomever he sees fit to coordinate it or to undertake it. So that could be one of the reasons why the suggestions by Mr. Hako for some legislation or making the foreign affairs or the foreign policy independent of political interference and political considerations is important, so that it's not subjected to anybody or any personality, but the organizational growth of the ministry that is responsible for executing PNG's foreign policy. So I think, but we can say that in the case of PNG, we cannot leave politics out of our, public service, and unfortunately, our foreign service and our foreign policy institutions are also, affected by, our politics. That's all I had to say.
I mean, to add on to the answers, for me, one simple factor from an academic point of view is one simple factor is knowing who is who in the country. Our leaders need to know, leaders of the bureaucracy as well as political leaders, they don't know who is who in the country. For example, you look at journalists, when they see a story breaking and they zoom in and they try to single out the experts in this particular field. If it's criminology or something about criminal, they go to a criminologist or an expert teaching criminology, or foreign policy for that matter, or engineering. They zoom in on the professor for engineering at Unitech or something, and they get the engineering insight. And then they put that together and they try to write out the news. So that's one example. Another example is the Australian High Commission is really good. They've already mapped out the country and they know who is who. For the last 2 or 3 years, they've been calling me and we've been having discussions on PNG's foreign policy, security, all matters related to international relations. So if they know who I am and where I'm working and what they want to get out of me, the discussions that we need to have in order to understand PNG, Australian foreign policy, security issues, then why not PNG? Why not the PNG government, the bureaucracy? Do they know who I am and what I'm doing, or what Mr. Kaiku is doing at UPNG? And other, academics around the country at UOG, WPU, and Unitech. So one factor is, knowing who is who in the country, and then you mapping it out. So, okay, at this university, we have experts on agriculture, international relations, economics at UPNG, and at Unitech, we have engineering, civil engineering, applied physics. Up at UOG, we have all the education people up there, all the educationists. So once you know that, and then that's where the academics come in during policy making. So for me, I think one simple factor is knowing who is who, having data and knowledge, information about who are the experts in the field, legal experts, economists, political scientists, social workers, sociologists, all these anthropologists, all other experts. So for me, that is one simple factor. That's why academics, we don't participate in the review process, because our bureaucrats and those at the helm of bureaucracy, they don't know who's who in the country. It's a small country, but if you look at Australia, they go to Lowy, they go to ANU, they know where the experts are. SP, Australian Strategic Policy Institute. So they go and they pick the brains of those top people there and then get the advice to streamline the policies, align it to other sectorial policies like what Doctor has shared with us. And then that's where you get the bureaucrats to do the implementation part of it and monitoring and evaluation. So that's my take, that's my addition to the discussion.
Later on to you, Mr. Aguirre, on those making up of the team, and then just continue on to what you said with the Australians and the other economies as well, like New Zealand and the US, and then time will forming team or kisim golo international conference. So once that academic goes and sits in front of the flag, he or she is representing that flag, and time talk interest block country talk. And right up to 2013, when we were getting ready to host APEC, the PNG delegation was always mesmerized, or at least intimidated by what everything was being said by the other economists from around the table. And then after we inquire, our APEC colleagues were telling us, no, he's one of our academics. We just brought him purposely to make the presentation. Why? Because we are not experts. We foreign service officers, we diplomats are not experts in sitting there reading something about energy or oil or coffee or what. We bring our experts. So then Ambassador Pomali, now Chief Secretary, did that from 2014 onwards. He started bringing in experts, not necessarily academic, but he started bringing in experts in ICCC, in standards, to go and sit there and talk. And it was very clear when the agenda came to this particular topic, he would stand up publicly, vacate the seat, and the expert will. And he would also introduce and say, "Let me give it to the person who's more knowledgeable than me." What's wrong with that? Yeah, I think some sense of humility and human nature and attitude must come into such situations to ensure that we have, because if the Ocean High Commissioner is calling you, then it shows bad on our own Papua New Guinean system. So those are just my personal observations.
Thank you, Mr. Ako. Any more questions or comments? We have about 30 minutes remaining before we wind up the discussion. Really interesting discussion. We've shared a lot of points. I'm sure all of you have taken note of, and it's for the betterment of future. It's for the future, like Mr. Ako said. In relation to my teaching philosophy, no one has monopoly over knowledge. So all of us, we know something, a little bit of something about something. So it's best to consult those who have that knowledge and insight on a particular issue in order to form a really good, solid opinion about a particular issue. Questions, comments for our panelists tonight? We'll pause a bit to give you people some time to digest what we've said. Yeah, Mr. Kaiku, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to just throw this question on the floor, and I think it relates to the eminent persons group work. I did not really spend much time reading into what they were doing, just reading media snippets and articles about what some of the things they were putting out there in the public domain. What were their actual? This question is to any of my two esteemed colleagues, Mr. Ako and Dr. Hualupmomi. Did you any of you to come across the terms of reference of what the EPG was supposed to have done? Like what were the parameters of the review? Were they given any terms of reference that we should be aware of, like, and bodies terms of reference open for public input? What were their methodology in terms of the way they did this review? Because we're only just hearing what they're doing, but not actually seeing it in terms of the workshops that they should be running, or conferences or seminars, or some of the things. Now, that's the first. The second, one can argue that the eminent persons group and the Department of Foreign Affairs and various other agencies that are doing reviews, it should be restricted because this is not a marketplace. It's not a public thing. Certain things like foreign policy or negotiations on very important things or statecraft should be restricted only to a handful of people to keep it under control. I think that is one of the arguments that officials may argue. But do you think that this is a sustainable kind of argument that review of foreign policy should just be restricted to a handful of people and they should be the go-to peoples when it comes to talking about foreign affairs, or should it be open for public discussions and dialogue? I'll just leave this question open.
I wasn't part of the eminent persons group. We just provided the push for them to be formed.
I didn't. I know that there is an eminent EPG group, but I've never come across any consultation. So I wouldn't know the TOR too. All of us are just waiting on what that body of work will look like. We are expecting, but as far as I am here over time, I have no idea what this TOR is. I know that there is a body existing working on it. They have concluded the work, and we'll see the body of work when it is launched, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Kaiku. Very interesting question. I believe all of us are on the same boat. There's a lot of secrecy surrounding the nature of what they're doing. So we as part of the civil society, general public, we don't know, we don't have the knowledge, we don't have knowledge about what the imminent persons group is doing and how they're going about the methodology that they are applying to collect information to help them put the white paper together. So
Yeah, I
that's
think-
something that
Yeah, Bernard, thank you. Sorry, I'll just jump in again. Why I'm
Yeah.
asking this is because, the calibrating of like what Dr. Hualupmomi said earlier, and I think the need for all of government approach and the calibrating of our foreign policy, if it's reviewed with the national trade policy 2017 to 2032. This is an existing national trade policy. Are there any, like, why I'm asking about this is because if we are talking about a review of our foreign policy, how does it coordinate to the national security policy, the alignment to our national defense policy, which is also, I don't know, being subject to review, to the national trade policy, for all these different policies, because we are dealing with the external environment, do they go in line, do they coordinate in terms of our approach in dealing with the challenges of the geopolitical rivalry, of the opportunities and challenges that are outside? So, I mean, if it's a very secretive process and terms of reference is not known, then you will not get the kind of like input that is needed to make it align to all other aspects of our international engagement. So I think that was where I was coming from.
Yeah, if I may add, when it comes to designing foreign policy or national security policy, the state is also conscious of its priorities. At some point, state has to decide whether it will expose some of its priorities that will also compete with external priorities. So it's a matter of you deciding which one should be exposed and which one shouldn't be exposed. Like for national security policy, it's a consultative process, but we are also mindful of competing interests, both external and internal. So that could be one of the reasons why there hasn't been more wider consultation, I believe. It's the degree to which certain policies should be exposed to the public in terms of consultation. It's just my opinion.
Mr. Ako, you want to add anything?
No, got both the commentaries and especially the issues raised by Mr. Kaiku and the interventions by Dr. Hualupmomi are spot on. Those are what we experience in today. We can only hope. We can only hope that what the eminent person groups recommends and the reports that have come up in line with the current thoughts. I wouldn't say in line with our development agendas because we have our development agendas, and as the presentations have gone earlier on, development agendas are there, but if the environment shifts in another direction, and we have to tweak it differently. That's how I'm looking at it. Or out of those 5 priorities, we might only get the 2 that's aligned with the flow of the current. But so that's how we can look at it. But they have what 200-300 years of experience, 400 years of experience. So I believe in them. I believe in their ability to set the course. The onus now lies on the next generation that comes out and grabs comes out green. They come out green. The generation that comes out green from school and is expected to run with it. And while it is not fair on asking them to run with the button, the onus lies on all the middle management to start mentoring, tutoring, coaching this next generation to support that game plan going forward. That's my thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Ko. I think the essence of what Mr. Kaiku is saying is the alignment of the various policies. Maybe I'm wrong, Mr. Kaiku can correct me on that. So if we come up with a review and then formulate a policy, then how does it align with the other sectorial policies? So I was looking at this particular issue, and I've written a chapter on PNG's maritime security to be published by the end of this year, sponsored by the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs for the Blue Security Project. And that was one main issue that I picked out. PNG, if we want to, because the push now from Australia and New Zealand is for countries to have maritime security policies. New Zealand has a really well-crafted maritime security policy. And for Australia, it's embedded within the 2017 Foreign Policy White Paper. And for PNG now, that's the discussion in the region. But when looking at our policy framework and all the various policies, there's a misalignment of all the policies. One example, a good example of alignment is the 2013 National Security Policy and the 2013 Defense White Paper. Both policies were formulated around the same time, so both policies were neatly aligned to each other. And then it was supposed to be reviewed after 5 years and then continue the process, but then that did not happen. So then we have this misalignment of policies, and we don't have a clear policy cycle every 5 years or every 10 years. So now we're trying to come up with a foreign policy white paper after how many years? 1981 was the last one. So that's the issue now we're having. So during my research, I found that all these policies are all over the place. So for the government to come up with a national maritime security policy, then it has to be aligned with our foreign policy white paper, the defense white paper, the national security policy, the national oceans policy, and all other sectorial policies, fisheries policy, climate change, and all that. So it's really complicated. And the factor that adds to this complication is our inability to review policies progressively, regularly, and then make sure they all align together. And they're all connected back to our overarching or the cascading effect, connected back to Vision 2050 and the National Strategic Plan 2030 and all that. So it's a very complicated thing, but hopefully we try to, our bureaucrats and political leaders try to sit down and see how best we can go forward in terms of policy implementation, reviewing, and monitoring and evaluation. Sorry, students, it's quite a mouthful, and I hope you're following the discussion. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to jump in and ask. All right, so we have about 20 minutes. Any further questions, comments, anything else from our panelists to add to our discussion on PNG's foreign policy review process and the importance of foreign policy in PNG?
Mr. Yegiora, can I just come in again? Hello, Mr. Yegiora?
Please go ahead, Mr. Kaiku.
Okay. Okay, I guess one of the things that I find when talking about, and you would obviously relate to it as an academic, the so-called two-level game and democratic deficit, and Robert Putnam's two-level game where domestic constituents have to be engaged continuously when when you're talking about issues like international relations and foreign policy. One of the likely benefits of foreign policy review that is consistently engaging with domestic stakeholders is that we create a culture of foreign policy literacy, yeah. Understanding that the international relations have a direct impact on Papua New Guinea's domestic affairs. So it is one of those, shall we say, flow-on effect of engaging with domestic stakeholders, whether it's in academia or farmers association or growers of coffee or people who are, you know, who have vested interest in the issue of foreign relations, trade and business houses. When we open up the review or anything to do with foreign affairs, and we get call for submissions of call for papers, people submit their opinions about certain agendas in Papua New Guinea's foreign relations. You are creating a culture of people in Papua New Guinea domestic constituencies taking active interest in learning about what their government is pursuing overseas and in the external environment that will benefit Papua New Guinea as a state. So this is one of the things that we are trying to get, you know, Papua New Guineans to think globally, yeah, to be globally conscious. And these kinds of things, they review for foreign policy should be engaging, because people, citizens, we have a vested interest in understanding how we are positioned in relation to our neighbors and in the global community. The current climate in our society is that most Papua New Guineans are really unaware of what international relations is and what the role of the Department of Foreign Affairs is about. The Department of Foreign Affairs is not, we try to understand what kind of public good and services they are producing for the country, because it is not impressed on the minds of the average taxpayer what the Foreign Affairs Department does. So the disconnect between Papua New Guineans, the average Papua New Guinean, and foreign relations can be corrected if, you know, these kinds of things like foreign policy reviews are so engaged with local stakeholders, domestic stakeholders. And I mean, as an academic, that would be one of the things that I'd really welcome, because it's, you know, I teach what diplomacy and, you know, democratic deficit is one of the most serious challenges of trying to get Papua New Guineans to see that we are in a precarious situation, especially with this so-called rivalry between China and the United States and our place in it. I think I'm plus one.
Thank
Yeah,
you, Mr. Kaiku. Yeah. Doctor, go ahead.
Bennett, yes, it's a very good point. I would like to think that we must have regular, you know, discussions in public forum, like you have in other countries. They have discussions with experts on foreign policy issues in terms of strategic issues, geopolitical issues, or climate change. Conversation with experts, and also we need more awareness from relevant agencies like Department of Foreign Affairs. We need to have more public awareness drive. You know, in when we do strategic plan for organizations, we all at the last point of the goal areas, we always put communication as one of the goal areas. That is how we convey the image of the department or agency to our stakeholders. So if you are guided by a strategic framework, then obviously awareness becomes part of the culture of your organization. You go out and you advocate, or you make awareness of your policy directions or your policy priorities, so that stakeholders are well aware of your pursuit in terms of the national interest. It could either come in form of awareness, or also in discussion forums, in dialogues, engaged by media. So, you know, something like we have in other countries. Patrick, you know, you always, you and your colleague have always been engaged by our media platform to discuss on, you know, specifically politics, dealing with parliamentary, electoral politics. You know, we need more of that, but in different space like foreign policy, geopolitics, trade and investment. We need more of that. The media must continue to engage more dialogue of our foreign policy, of our national security foreign policy, of our trade and investment policy. What's the government projection and standing in international relations?
Okay, so William has a question. He said I can read because his mic is not working. William Wariambu is asking, what would be the best way to get the Department of Foreign Affairs to at least think about employing the expertise of and allowing for academia to weigh in on the review of this foreign policy? I believe you are referring to the current foreign policy white paper. Please correct me if I'm wrong. So this is the question from William. Mr. Ako, what are your thoughts?
Maybe my thoughts on this would be I think it will be quite difficult, not impossible, but difficult now to for the academia to have a look at that. But maybe if it's possible for an overview of it, not a review but an overview of it after. I know it's like putting it's not a proper process, but because the process bolted. So the only possible way I see that happening would be after it is endorsed and it comes out to be implemented, then we have to look at the monitoring and evaluating aspect of it. The mail process could take effect, covering its implementation, and I think during the time now, it is a must that the academia must be called in to start looking at it with a more academic savvy focus. That's how I would answer, because something called cabinet finish, as what Dr. Hualupmomi said earlier on. So we wait until it's endorsed and out. Then once you start looking at the operationalization of it, and I think that's when another round of seminars must be held. Now, purposely not on looking at the foreign policy, but on how it can be implemented, based on how many pillars they have in it and the directions it will go. That would be my thought.
Yeah, agree.
Maybe Dr. Hualupmomi could expand further on that, or
the process has been completed. You cannot repeat that process again. It's in the process of being sanctioned by the cabinet and parliament. So, as Mr. Ako rightly pointed out, after it is launched and you have a copy, and if the Department of Foreign Affairs decide to do stakeholder awareness, that's when you can provide your opinion, but it will be through the monitoring and evaluation periodic process, as Mr. Ako. At the moment, we are late in bringing the academia into. So, as you know, if I do something, why would I give it back to you to make a comment and you bring me back to stage one? We are not in that process now. To be realistic, it must go to authorities for sanctioning and for implementation. So that's how government process is structured, unfortunately.
Thank you. I think the concern is lack of academic voice in the current foreign policy white paper. So where do academics come in? Do we come in after all the process, everything is completed and we come in, or should they should have consulted us during the process of putting together the white paper? So yeah, that's something that you future policymakers can, reflect on and see how best we can go forward from here. In the next review, if, for instance, if you are in a position where you can influence policy review, policy making, then you have to consider whether or not we should bring in the academics during the initial stages or in between, or after we've completed everything. You have to sit down and think about how best you can plan the review process itself. So that's an interesting conversation. I hope people can continue that conversation in your own time and in your own space, so we get a clear picture of what we need to do in the years to come. Anybody want to add on to the discussion? We have roughly around 8 minutes, or should I wrap up the discussion? You tuk plenty and utu plangrena, I mean.
I just wanted to say something about the academic side, and especially I don't quite really understand the framing of this question by Mr. William Wariambu. I think this is this ongoing kind of tension between practitioners and scholars, right? The argument that practitioners are much more savvy in terms of how they deal with the actual situation on the ground, and academics just in the textbook and classroom teaching of theory and abstract thought, and therefore there is really no value in perhaps what they may bring. I think you may have covered this already with your previous lectures with Mr. Hako. Maybe this could just be a reflection of that kind of tension that I just saw. So practitioners, they necessarily will want to get the job done immediately with the resources at the disposal, and I think that is perhaps one of those explanations as to why we are not using the academia. Another likely explanation could be that perhaps the way that our educational institutions and specific know-how and specialization in international relations is not there to begin with. I'm afraid to say international relations is not really a bread and butter aspect of training in universities. I remember in the 1990s and 1980s, political science department here at PNG had a standalone higher program, foreign policy analysis, comparative politics, international organizations, all these different sub-disciplines of political science. Higher were producing the current generation of foreign policy makers. Now so much focus is on area studies and domestic politics and at the expense of international relations. So maybe there is really no pool of experts on international relations that are really readily available. That may be a reason why academia is not engaged as it's supposed to be with activities of this sort.
Yeah, Patrick, you are quite correct. If you look at the experts in international relations, we don't have many. We have Bennett around. I'm also around, Mr. Ako. But at the PhD level, I think I am the only Papua New Guinean with areas in international relations, security, and all this. We need more experts in the area of international relations, because international relations is again it has its own specialized field as well. You have international security, you have international environment, you have international political economy. So there are sub-branches within international relations itself. So it's a big subfield of its own within political science. But in PNG, we don't have experts. When I said experts, people with PhDs. So we need more experts in international relations in those specialized areas. Unfortunately, in PNG, I don't see most of our honor students, they want to do something that is not relevant. Because I marked and I supervise some of the students too, and I know. No, we need to review our programs so that they are aligned to international programs, the currency of the program. So in that way, it ignites the interest of students to go more deeper into. Because if you ask many of the current graduates, they don't know what is international political economy. They don't know what is international diplomacy. They don't know what is international environment diplomacy. All they know is that there is international relations. Even some don't even know what international relations is a subfield of political science. So we need to encourage more students to get into political science and international relations. Mr. Patrick, sorry, unfortunately, I need to say that during my time, we have international relations program at UPNG. We have international political economy. So the program was very good. But I've just realized that the international relations program is not a core program in political science at UPNG. You have Australia in the Western Pacific, South Pacific politics. These are not international relations course. They are an element of, what constitutes international relations. You need to have international relations, introduction, and then you go specific, international security, international law. So in that way, you ignite the spirit of student to begin to start thinking about specializing in those areas. So those of us who have been taught during that time when that program is available, we've seen how important this program is. So like me, I specialize into geopolitics and energy security. That's just my comment.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Patrick, you have anything to say before I wind up?
It's what Dr. Hualupmomi is saying is, I think this is part of the bigger question about capacity in the institution. So the question was about whether academia should be engaged, and I'm just stating the obvious that, in the absence of specialized folks who are spend years researching and publishing and contributing to the literature on international relations. We don't have any of these kinds of specialists in our university. And Dr. Hualupmomi is right in saying that focus has been on area studies, Australia and the Western Pacific, and SPP, South Pacific politics, and Southeast Asia politics. These are all area studies, sub-disciplines of political science. And of course, international relations is not there's no introductory of it, and the more advanced aspect of it, international political economy, introductory and selected topics. Those courses were available during the time of Dr. James Chin and Dr. Henry Okole and Professor Alan Patience. Currently, this focus now is more on the parochial domestic politics. That explains why perhaps academia is not trusted with, So maybe one of the recommendations that me and Venon Gawi suggested in the publication that we did for the NBR, one of those US-based policy think tanks, is to upgrade the international relations, as a area of specialization for our universities and research think tanks that are oriented towards foreign affairs, right? NRI and some of these other research think tanks, they are more onto domestic affairs, and therefore when we talk about foreign policy review, where else should we source the academic credentialed people to contribute to the review? So I guess those were my concluding remarks, I guess.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaiku and Dr. Hualupmomi, for adding value to our discussion so far. We've been talking about foreign policy and different aspects of foreign policy, historical timeline, and we are so happy that you've joined us for this particular Q&A session and to, just a different voice. I guess the students are tired of Mr. Ako and I talking a lot and the same old voice. It's good to listen to two new voices. And we want to invite you to our final session, which is on future trends in PNG's foreign policy. I'm sure both of you will have very interesting ideas about where we should go in terms of the future. What are the trends that we need to take note of, and how do we come up with strategies to? And one big one is the US-China rivalry or geopolitical competition. So that's for next week. If you are interested, then we can send out an invite, and Mr. Kaiku can invite the students as well from UPNG. It's good that we bond and continue to share and talk about it. So we develop a partnership. Political science, PNG studies. In essence, we're studying the same thing. We're studying politics. We're studying human society and how we should progress going forward. So this could be a start of a new relationship. So thank you very much, Mr. Kaiku, and Doctor, thank you for your time. Mr. Kaiku, thank you for your time. Mr. Ako, as always, we are blessed by your commitment and your input so far in our study. So that brings us to the end of our session for tonight. And I thank you, our audience, Matilda, everyone, Sylvia, Janice, Wilma, Ila, all of you. Thank you for joining us. And those of you watching on Facebook as well, and those who will be watching via YouTube, thank you for joining us. And I hope you'll continue the conversation on PNG's foreign policy. We surely will next week. So once again, we invite all of you to join us next week for our final lecture on future trends in PNG's foreign policy. So good night to all of you.
Thank you, Mr. Yagira, and I'd like to thank Mr. Lawiako and Dr. Francis Hualupmomi and yourself and the students in your class. Thank you for opening the discussion and including me in part of this, and our students too from diplomacy course. Also, some of them are online. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to also say, Bernard, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for Mr. Ako always keep up with the conversation with DWU University. I'll regularly come in and speak with you. But on some matters, I will not speak because I deal with classified information. But I would like to encourage this conversation to extend beyond DWU and UPNG political science student. So you have full participation of the two schools at DWU and political science. Mr. Patrick Kaiku, please organize your students so they must participate so that those of us who are in the practical world, we can speak and they can learn from us. So we elevate the level of this discussion by bringing in by engaging with students more often. I would like to think that this will make the conversation more interesting. But it's good to start small, and in the next conversation on next week.
Yeah.
Next week, Mr. Kaiku invite the entire political science student and Bennett. Thank you, Bennett. You've done well in DWU by bringing experts like Mr. Lawiako. So DWU is doing well in terms of international relations. And I believe you will continue to improve. As we always say, quality assurance is a destination. It's a continual process. Sorry, it's a journey. It's not a destination. So thank you, Bennett, and the students who are participating. Bennett, just pass my message to one of the students, Sonia. Sonia, she did a, I think, final project, and she sent a report to me to make some comments. She did an excellent paper. I made some minor comments and I emailed her, but she didn't respond. I forgot their surname, but
It's
she did
Anel.
present. Yeah, she
Anel.
did. Yeah, she did present the paper on the final paper. Otherwise,
Alright.
thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Patrick and Mr. Ako. Mr. Ako, good night to you. You have anything else to? All right.
No God. No God.
Okay.
Me harim tupla big man na miss sai lo next week again. Good night,
Okay.
Oh
Logan.
yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, I forgot
School
to
good.
say.
Thank
I
you. Me
forgot
too,
to say
psych up. Mr. Lawi, I'm psyching up, but Independence Day too. Na mi plus psych up to learn. I think on students belum you no come in sampai belum lah masuk
Yeah,
lo
alright.
preparation stuff. 49 years they're feeling the effect of it when in on campus there. So yeah, next week hopefully.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Kaiku, we have a program. We have to organize ourselves by next week.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, I also forgot to say thank you to Patrick Kaiku, who has been doing a good job at political science department, especially in international relations. He's trying his best to keep that international feel alive, and I'm sure Patrick, you will do more value by engaging experts into designing programs of international relations. So do consult and
Yes.
expand the scope of your program, like Bennett is doing now.
Okay.
So for students, you don't know, Bennett and I, we were classmates. We did honors together. We did masters together in China, same institute, and then so we are colleagues together. All right, thank you.
All right.
I have
Thank
to
you.
go home now.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye.